Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's version of Compliance Scorecard and our weekly live stream. I'm here with our good friends from Nodeware and IGI. We're talking some really fun stuff here around penetration testing. What is that? Why is that? What are we doing around that? And so I'm going to give Ishmael an opportunity to come up here on stage, take a few seconds, introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and yeah, tell us who you are, my friend. Why is that? What are we doing around that? And so I'm going to give Ishmael an opportunity to come up here on stage, take a few seconds, introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and yeah, tell us who you are, my friend.
Yeah, sure. My name is Ismail Rahmoun, and I am Pentest leading team for IGI.
So I'm going to give Ishmael an opportunity.
I think there is an echoing.
If you have the live stream running in another window on LinkedIn or whatever, you probably want to turn that off.
Yeah, it's Pentest leading team for IGI.
A little bit of feedback here. Why don't we do this? Let's do this. Let's have Frank come on up, and Frank, you can introduce yourself while we're dealing with a little bit of audio issues over there.
Yeah, I had the same issue with the LinkedIn running in the background, and I had to shut it off. So, hi Tim, thanks for having us. My name is Frank Ramondi. As the slide says, I'm VP for Channel Alliances and Partnerships with Nodeware, and also with our broader company IGI, or Infinite Group Inc. I manage relationships with Compliance Scorecard and others where we are kind of doing a 1 + 1 = 3 effort, right? We're trying to make it easier for MSPs to use individual products, but use them together and make sure that they're synced and they're working well, and it doesn't cause more headaches than the MSPs already have. So that's my role. I've been around in the industry a long time, and really excited about what we're doing with you guys.
Yeah, and we're really excited to have you too. Let's see if I click the right buttons. Does this work? No, this one works, right? Let's try that. Oh, hey, there we are. We're back again. Ishmael, you want to try to give it another shot?
Yeah, sure. I think it was a problem on my side. Sorry about that.
No problem. Go ahead and take a moment and introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. This is Ismail Rahmoun. I am Pentest leading team for IGI. I have about 14 years in IT, so I spent half of that time on blue teaming, then on purple teaming, and finally on red teaming. I am certified CSSP, I am CHS Master 2. I am also OSCP certified. I am really enthusiastic about security. That was always my childhood dream. And finally, I make it real with AGI. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I really love the opportunity to talk to other like-minded CISSPs and other people like us that kind of get it, right? And I'm really excited today because this whole conversation of pen testing is, wow, what is this? And so, but before we dive in, I'm Tim Golden, founder of Compliance Scorecard, where we help MSPs operationalize the compliance function, the GRC function within your MSP. And we make that uncomplicated and simplified using our easy to understand compliance scorecards so that you can have that conversation, that risk conversation with you and your customer as an MSP. And like I said, we're really excited here today to talk about penetration testing. Like, what the heck is penetration testing? We might want to just kind of start with, let me find there we go. That's the layout I was looking for. Yes. So can we just level set and talk about what the hell is a penetration test? Well, right? Because I think that is one of the biggest challenges in the industry, right?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of confusion around the term. I mean, I think people overuse it in some cases and actually underuse it in others. And there's really, I would say there's a differentiation. We'll bring up the slide here in a moment, but really there's kind of a 3 elements to a penetration test, if you will, or 3 three things to think about. One is what often is confused with is a vulnerability assessment, right? So in insurance compliance, you know about, right, over the years, there's been that tick box, right? Or have you done a vulnerability assessment in the last year? Check. Okay, move on. So that's from a pen test standpoint, and Ishmael's going to go deeper into this, but really that's kind of the starting point of a pen test, just to grip of what's there. And so that's one piece of a penetration test, is the vulnerability assessment generally. There's another term that we'll throw in here, and again, we'll define it a little bit further, which is vulnerability management, right? So vulnerability management is the continual, right, the ongoing identification of devices, identification of their potential issues and their vulnerabilities, right? Published vulnerabilities that have been found by manufacturers, by other users. And those are things that we as MSPs or the audience, right, can look at proactively. So maybe if you want to pull that slide up, Tim, we can just kind of put the three together and show what.
I'll definitely do that here, but I want to banter this just a wee bit more and talk about the whole idea of vulnerabilities versus penetration testing, because there is a lot of talk and there's been a lot of things about, automated pen testing, blah, 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 kind of removing the human element out of a penetration test. For those of us like Ishmael and myself and, purple team you mentioned before, red team, green team, pink team. Yes, because we're on the pink team. There's been a lot of this like myth about automating stuff, right? And so I'm going through our SOC 2 and our ISO. One of the requirements is penetration test. And in that conversation with our auditor, I'm like, hey, if I just run burp sweep, am I good? Or if I just run, Nessus or Nodeware or Connect Secure, any vulnerability scan, am I good? Like, does that cover my penetration test requirement for my attestation? Are we good here? And, the result was quite interesting. Like, no, there's different types of penetration tests, right? And so I think, Ishmael, you would probably agree there's unauthenticated and authenticated. Right. So there's probably way more that goes into a penetration test than just running Burp Suite or a Nessus or a VulnerScan or some tool. Right. Talk about a little bit about like this concept of penetration testing beyond just a tool to run a thing.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you cannot build your whole security based on what the tool is telling you, because the tool work on database of vulnerability that are already known for the tool. So what really the tool is doing is trying to fingerprint your services, fingerprint your environment, and to tell you based on what he finds, what kind of vulnerability you have. Then he will try to list it for you with the severity, maybe give you some recommendation, but on no way that can answer is I'm safe just by knowing that. No, that never can be the answer. Why? Because vulnerability are just, that you have a weakness, but is that weakness can be exploited? How can be exploited? What are the impact if it's exploited? That vulnerability assessment cannot answer this question. So the pen tester, he is the person who can answer it. Of course, you mentioned that there is automated tool that can do pen testing. Yes, there is automated tool, and now with AI, this automated tool are getting more smarter, but it cannot remove the human work from it, because until now, until today, only human who can build, make sense to the information, if you see what I mean. A tool cannot make sense to the information. A human can grab pieces of information from everywhere and build an attacking vector. A tool cannot do that. At some extent, he may be able to, but he cannot figure all the aspect of how to attack a company. And maybe on this meeting, we can talk about some example. I ran into it on the AGI team, and we can discuss how maybe a tool can tell you you are safe, you have nothing to worry about, but once you pen test, you find completely different scenario to access a target.
Gotcha. Yeah, you know, you're right. You can't remove the human from the process, at least in a quote unquote true penetration test, right? Like as you said, being able to have some tools to do some discovery and maybe even automate a few pieces of the attack surface around that discovery, but actually taking the tactics from the humans to then actually do things to go after stuff, right? And this is kind of where we start to separate from, you know, penetration, like diving into finding, you know, an attack surface versus the you know, vulnerability kind of testing, the scanning of what vulnerability management does, right? Since the topic is penetration and vulnerability management. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about, you know, vulnerability and kind of how that plays into the overall pieces.
Yeah, I'll take that to start. I think that one of the simplest ways to look at it is kind of an internal versus external standpoint, right? Vulnerability management and assessments are really from the inside, right? It's your IT department, it's the MSP, it's sort of think of it as being the doctor, right? The doctor's looking at your test results, you're kind of recommending what you should do. And so, you know, it's up to you and your customer whether they actually do it. The penetration test is sending a virus your way and seeing what it does to you, right? In a health and a body element. That's sort of the inside-outside preparation. But if we look at the three, if you bring those back up, I think that assessment discussion or definition, right, it's that one time, it's a snapshot. Hey, let's look inside, see what we got. Let's make sure we know all the assets that we have in our environment. What's our inventory? What's our first glance? What's really glaringly wrong with our network? Mm-hmm. And that again is used as a starting point for the penetration test because Ismail and others like him, they need that starting point of, okay, we know where we're at. Now let's try and break it in and see how that can be exploited. And vulnerability management, kind of in the middle, is kind of the 1-2 punch or the 2-1 punch, depending on what you're starting with. Right? The vulnerability management is understanding on a daily basis, you know, what environments, what new vulnerabilities are coming and you know, finding themselves onto your devices, right? Or a new Microsoft or Cisco vulnerability on a product is published, right? ConnectWise, pick your vulnerability that's been in the news lately. Those you don't know until you know whether you have that in your environment, and that's what vulnerability management is about: is continuously looking at your devices, scanning them, finding things that could be exploited. Right? Again, the penetration test is going to exploit those things from coming from the outside. So, kind of a good, you know, inside outside is probably the simplest way to look at this of doing that. And you need both, right? You can't do one. I mean, you can do one or the other, but really, ideally, if you're really in a true secure environment, and you know, again, Tim, you can talk about the requirements coming up from compliance, right? But it's really a yes. Which one do you want? You need to have both.
Yeah. So Ishmael, tell me a little bit about your thoughts around the differences between vulnerability management or vulnerability assessments versus, you know, a true pen test.
Okay, before I dive into it, I think, can you show the next slide? Because I want to explain a little bit about what is vulnerability, what is an exploit.
Sure.
Yeah, the next one. Yeah, that one. So I think we need first to understand what is this and what is that. So a vulnerability is weakness. It's a risk. It's something that was not nicely done on or programmed into your software, for example. And the exploit is taking that risk and use it in the way to compromise a target, or to, for example, compromising target could be accessing the network, could be extracting sensitive information, could be harming the target. It could be any aspect. So vulnerability, you can see them on three big, let's say, domains. So you have the software, where it's everything related to a program, to your Windows system, to your Linux system, to any program you may use it. There is a hardware or physical vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities are related to anything physical you may use it, like a building where you live, or maybe your car, maybe your phone, anything physical you are using. And the third category of vulnerability are humans. So we human, we have vulnerabilities that can be exploited. So it's not just software. And usually this is the hardest part because it's not easy to mitigate them, and it's not easy to fix them. Uh, and the other point is that how to work with this vulnerability. So usually you have three ways to work with any weakness you may have. Or you to accept it if you have no way to fix it, or if it's business critical. So you cannot just say, okay, I'm gonna stop using the software because it has that vulnerability. Your business needs it. So you have to find a workaround, or you just accept that vulnerability as is. The second thing is to mitigate it. That's the best way, is to completely remove it. Or if you are not good at that, then what you do, you transfer that risk to another person or to another entity. Let's say I don't know how to deal with vulnerability. I'm going to hire another company who will do the job for me. So I want to do this definition before I can now answer maybe the question, what is an assessment and what is a pen testing? If you want, we can dive into that question now if you want.
Yeah, I mean, you do bring up a good point, right? So, in CIS, right? So a lot of MSPs follow CIS. Doesn't necessarily have to be CIS. It can be any standards framework, right? There is a component of what do you have? Where is it? What devices? What humans? What assets? What things do you have? And when we look at the difference between penetration testing and vulnerability, right? Humans could be vulnerable. Obviously, we know that. But looking at the devices and looking at the, what does this actually mean for an MSP? Let me pull this up, right? Actually understanding that definition of a vulnerability, right? That weakness, that that risk within some portion of the organization or enterprise of the company that can then be exploited, that can then be determined as an area of risk. And by the way, when you're doing a penetration test, you're trying to discover those vulnerability pieces, right? So they kind of go hand in hand, right? So when we did talk about some of the automated components around penetration testing, you can use things like Nodeware to be able to discover those vulnerability or vulnerable systems that could be exploited as part of the penetration test, right? And so as we're starting to think a little bit through this, right, and getting through the differences of here, let me pull up the next slide, getting into assessment versus penetration testing, right? And I think we kind of wanted to dive a little bit deeper into like what is the difference between these two. So Frank, you want to take this one a little bit?
Well, actually, I'll let Ismail. He's the expert here. But
sure.
Yeah. So no problem. I can take that. So to be able to answer what is this and what is that. So let's see what each test is answering. So then we can understand what the purpose of each test. So the vulnerability assessment, you can look at it like an inventory of your weaknesses, inventory of your vulnerabilities. So it will give you your vulnerabilities, it will give you the severity of the vulnerability, which means how bad is that vulnerability and how likely it can be exploited. And then it will give you also the recommendation, like how to fix it, how to mitigate it, or at least if there is no way to fix it, how to work around it. If sometimes there is some vulnerability are very critical, and the manufacturer cannot produce the patch, so we will find only a workaround. So now, if we understand that, then we know that assessment will answer this question: what vulnerability I have, and what are the severity, how can I fix them, and how can I mitigate them. The pen test will take it a little bit further than that. So it will not just tell you if you have this, you have that, and this is the vulnerability you have, but it will show you how this vulnerability can be in real life exploited. The other thing that the pen test has, and maybe you cannot see it on assessment, is combining vulnerability. Combining vulnerability, it's not easy to see it on assessment because I can give you an example if you want how vulnerability can be combined. But before I go to my example, I included here the military analogy because I think that's very close to how you should look at vulnerability and pen testing. So if you look to your IT department as your military, so it's like defending your company. So that's your military. And you want to assess your military, so you have to look how much ammunition you have, how much weapon you have. Maybe you need to buy more strategic weapon. Maybe you have to secure your border. Maybe you have to deploy more soldier here. Maybe you have to hire more soldier. So this is the assessment. But is that enough for a country to say, okay, I'm safe. If there is a war, I'll be fine? The answer probably is no, because if you don't really know what happened when you get to the war, you have two options. You wait for the war to happen, then you will know. I think that's not a good idea. Or you can send your military to what we call a joint military exercise. So you can then see how your troop will be doing on real life. And that's the vulnerability, and that's the pen testing.
I love the joint military. So, you know, I have a military background. We used to do these things called JRTC. We would bring in not just the Army, we'd bring in the Marines, we'd bring in, you know, the Air Force. Like we would bring all these different divisions to in organizations together into one kind of scenario, and I hate to say play out the battlefield, but play out the battlefield, right? And to determine, like, we want to be able, and how does this relate to an MSP and getting there, right? In these joint exercises, we would want to determine where we were vulnerable, right? And we would want to be able to assess where those vulnerabilities lie. Like you said, maybe we didn't have a good set of foxholes with crossfire across it, and we didn't have the ability to, you know, be able to look and have those lines of sight across so that someone could penetrate us, right?
Correct.
And the penetration test is they discovered that we had that our foxholes were too far apart, and we couldn't get that line of sight to have crossfire across that. And so they could walk right through that. They discovered the vulnerability. Hey, their foxholes are too far apart. And then they determined they could kind of penetrate us or pen test us by walking right through where our crossfire could not actually defend against that. So in terms of an MSP and how this applies is maybe you have a firewall. Right? Great. You've locked it down. You've got a firewall. You know, we're talking traditional network here. And maybe you forgot to close the RDP port. So yes, you've done logging, you've done other things, you've done whatever, but you haven't actually locked down the RDP port. And heaven forbid you've all locked down your RDP ports. If you haven't, stop this webinar right now and go look at locking down your RDP port. But even things like SSH, right? Many of my, you know, internet connected, whatever, like SSH is locked down. Two-factor, we've even changed the ports so it's not on default. You know, no root access, all the things. But the point that I'm trying to make is that as an MSP, while you might have a firewall, you forgot one of those areas, or you didn't know about one of those areas of defense. And doing an assessment will help you discover where those vulnerabilities are and then bringing in the purple team, the red team, or the pink team to see if they are actually exploitable.
Yeah.
Right. So relating it back to an MSP, we run a vulnerability scan. Great. We've identified these areas of risk, RDP open. Well, now you know that a penetration testing company or a pen tester can actually get through there. You better lock that down.
Yeah, Tim, I may give you another example because that's something we had with some customer. The example was that we had a customer and he has a VoIP IP device, and we scanned it with the scanner. We did the assessment. Nothing too bad. I mean, except a CLI access. I think it was an SSH service with a guest account enabled on it. So nothing bad. The guest account has a very limited access. You can just display some basic information. And in the same time, that device, it has an admin page. But for to access the admin page, you need the password and you need the username. So now we start to think about how can we use that guest account and that web page to be maybe able to access that device. So what we did, we went to the device, we used the guest account, and we look if there is a serial number that we can show from that CLI. The guest account can show you the serial number. And the serial number was the password for the admin page. So if you scan your device, your scanner will tell you, fine, there is no problem. It does just SSH, and the guest account is default account, no worries. But if you combine the two vulnerability together, you get an admin access. So that's why assessment on itself, it's good to tell you about what you have, but it's never enough to tell you if you can get compromised. Yeah.
So, and that kind of leads us into our like major differences, right? The real life simulations, right? So we run some scans, we identify some stuff. Maybe those things are like, yeah, okay, guest account, I can't get in, but this is where the human comes into play, into that, you know, whole actual penetration stuff, right? Is you were able to kind of reverse engineer quickly and easily how to get into that administrative interface because you were able to discover it. So it sounds like your echo's gone away. Hopefully we're good here with the echo, but so yeah, some of these real world experiences, but talk about, you know, Frank or you know, Ishmael, talk a little bit about like, what are the major differences?
Yeah, so the major difference here you can see are like, for me, it's 3 bullet points. So first one is that about one is more like an inventory, which is the assessment. The second, which is the pen testing, you can see it's more like a real life scenario. So it will put you really on the pen test. It will put you really on the scenario, not just to know your weaknesses. The other aspect is the dynamic part. So the pen test is more interactive with your asset. It will not just scan them and give you the result, where the assessment is more static. So it will give you an idea about the weaknesses, but that's it. It will not go further with you to show you how this can be exploited. The pen test, the two other are, I think, the major difference, a human factor. Yeah. I would say 90% of the time, attacker is not interested to attack a firewall because the firewall is a security device and it has a lot of features to detect him. But human are more easy to attack. Why? Human make mistake. You can trick a human to click on the link. You can trick a human to download the file. So for the attacker, it's more easier to proceed with human weaknesses than to try to break into a firewall and get into the internal network. And that the assessment, usually this kind of assessment, I mean, you can see it sometime on assessment, but most of the time this is a part of the pen testing engagement. And the fourth thing is the OSINT, or what we call open source intelligence. In pen testing, we call it also recon. So this is a big area to detect your target. You can build your whole career just on OSINT. So that's completely a big domain.
Yeah.
Because it's not just, yeah.
I was saying, I think the other piece here at a higher level, I kind of like to look at, instead of the differences, is how they work together. Pen test can be, again, it's kind of that attack in, you might be doing it once a quarter, once every 6 months, maybe even just once a year. But the vulnerability management is kind of your ongoing checkpoint. So you're going to get a pen test, you're going to get a report, you're going to get a clear indication of what needs to be done, what are the exploits, what have they been able to do, the recommendations, right? So you're going to work on those over time. And you're not going to run another pen test to see if you've done those well, but you could use the vulnerability management to check, right? And to look for, in addition to looking for new vulnerabilities that might have come onto the network, you're also going to be able to look and say, hey, that server had X, Y, and Z needed to be done. Are those patched? Are those remediated? Have we fixed that? And that's where a tool like Nodeware can go in and look on a daily basis. And it is looking on a daily basis. You can look at it as you need it. And see, okay, gosh, we're making progress, right? When that next pen test comes, we should have, we're not going to see these same issues again, or if we do, shame on us, right? So that's kind of the 1-2 punch, right? Or the 2-1 punch, depending on what you're starting with. You might start with vulnerability management as an ongoing compliance requirement, right? And insurance company, or your NIST or your FTC, whatever. Somebody's going to come down and say, hey, I need a pen test as well. Now, when that pen test comes, because you've been managing and proactively looking at your network, you should have a more successful pen test, right? In other words, not a bad one.
Yeah, as you're talking here, I really like the conceptually as an MSP thinking about like the dynamic version of kind of this testing stuff versus the static approach, right? And let's hope, at least in the vulnerability management side, that it's not static, right? That it's not a one and done, right? Because building out a vulnerability management program, having your SLAs around that, dealing with the criticals versus the lows on some time frame and on some cadence, right? But you brought up a really great point about the human factor, right? Because yes, we can have our scanners, we can identify things that need to be patched and patch them, especially those with a high EPSS score or CVS score, and to patch those as patches are available. But you can't patch humans, right? And so, when you're thinking about building out this whole, that's the layout I've been looking for. As you're thinking about building out this whole, vulnerability management program and delineating between let's attack something, penetration test, versus let's discover something and figure out where our weaknesses are, right? And those are some definite, definitely having some major differences between those two. Maybe we could talk a little bit about like when these things should happen, when these things should like. Oh my goodness, it's Tom and Jerry. I love Tom and Jerry. How did you know I like Tom and Jerry? So maybe we can talk a little bit about the when in the the how and that kind of stuff.
Okay, I will disappoint you a little bit here, Tim. I'm sorry. Maybe I will disappoint everybody, but there is no answer that will fit everyone about when and how often. There is no answer.
Actually, there is, and let me pull this up right here. It's right here. This is the when and how.
Yeah, but let me explain first why there is not answer that fit everybody. There is an answer for sure, but it depends on each one. So first of all, you have to look at it from the attacker perspective. So to be able to see when, you have to look from the eyes of the attacker. So let's take two companies. One is a bank and one is agriculture company. So do you think that the attacker will be interested in the same way? Of course, no. So the bank will need much more assessment and much more pen testing than an agriculture company may need. Of course, both of them, they need to do them, but how often, that will not be the same, because the type of the business will require from you to be more proactive if you are a bank. If you are, for example, a strategic business like healthcare, you have to be more proactive. You have to do more pen tests. You have to do more assessment for sure. But if you are in another business, it doesn't mean that you don't need it, but you are not a favorite target for the attacker, if that makes sense. The other thing is, I cannot tell you when, but I cannot tell you when you should, but I can tell you when you must. And when you must is, for example, if you are deploying new system, if you are about to merge with another company, or if you are about to have acquisition in another business. Here, it's not just you should, it's a must, because you are adding new risk to your company. So it's time to do an assessment, and it's time to do a pen test. Now, yes, your answer is about monitoring. It's the best answer you can get, because you will have always an eye on your network to see what are what vulnerability are showing up. And I think here, maybe Frank can maybe tell you more about it, because he's more into Nodeware and more into pen testing. Nodeware, he will have this global view of your network, be able to see what asset you have, what vulnerability you have. And there is also two exciting features are coming, I think. Maybe also Frank can explain them a little bit better than me. About patch management. So it will make it much easier for the end user or MSP to manage their user, to deploy patch, to roll them back, and also integration of the AI. AI, I think, will help a lot the MSPs on guide them how to deploy sensors or to deploy agent. I think that would be a great add-on. But at the end of the day, you have to keep in mind that this is Tom and Jerry. This is cat and mouse game. So there will be always vulnerability, and you have always to do something to mitigate that. Yeah. So you have to balance. I would say you have to balance. But having something like Nodeware, it will give you a lot of peace of mind, I think.
Yeah. So Tim, I was going to put a little bit back on you, just in terms of the when and when does an MSP need to think about it, right? And part of it, from the basic, our standpoint from a general is, again, it's continuous, right? You need to be proactive. You need to be thinking ahead for your customers. They're expecting you to be anyway. So if you're not using a tool like Nodeware or others, you're not doing the right level of service and not looking for things that need to be found. But maybe what are the relative to NIST or CIS or the other FTC? What kind of compliance requirements are? What are they saying that needs? Both of these need to be done.
Yeah, Frank, thanks for bringing that up. Right. So, one of the things that we try to solve for a compliance scorecard is that assessment cadence. Right. The ability to be reminded of things that need to happen on some regular cadence. Right. And so as we looked at all the GRC tools out there, there weren't really a lot of great ones. So that when do I do this stuff? What are the triggering events around this stuff? And am I being notified in the right places? Right? Am I having tickets in the PSA? Am I getting Slack or team messages specifically for either our customers? So let's talk about the when, right? I'll pick on HIPAA, right? You should be doing or conducting at least an annual security risk assessment, right? And I would recommend that you do that regardless of the framework. Right. In fact, with MSPs, I would probably consider doing this as part of your quarterly business review or as part of your risk review, and building out a compliance as a service offering at your MSP using, using Nodeware, using compliance scorecard, using tools that you already have in place so that you can have those conversations on a regular cadence, right? When would I do vulnerability management? 24/7, right? And then I would have a vulnerability management program in place that would identify the criticals all the way down to the lows, and I would address the critical on an SLA. Maybe it's 24 hours that they would be reviewed, and then 24 hours once a patch was available. And I'm speaking round numbers here.
Yeah.
Versus a low, it's low. It doesn't have, it's not highly exploitable. It has a low EPSS score. I know I need to deal with it. I gotta deal with it. I'm going to probably knock those off in 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, right? So when we're building out the VMP and we're thinking about when to do these tests, vulnerability management, 24/7, 365, and then build your SLA around critical, high, medium, low, etc. And whatever
exactly. We've seen that sort of attack on the attacks, right, is really relevant, because we've had a number of MSPs that have started using Nodeware, and they're like, this is great, it's giving us all this data. Oh shit, it's giving us all this data. Now we got to go do something, right? I got to do it all right now. And vulnerabilities aren't. I mean, there are things they need to be addressed and need to be taken care of, but they're not all at the same priority level, right? There's a lot of things that just are there that are potential. So the approach of, and we tell this to a lot of MSPs, when all of a sudden they see, a customer with 50 people, they see 150 devices, there's 50, vulnerabilities found, and 10 of them are critical. It's like, okay, don't worry about the 150. Let's focus on those 10. Get your SLA, get your plan going, and then and those taking care of those 10 often takes care of other ones as well, particularly when you do a patch where you do some level of remediation. So it's a cheap piecemeal.
I'm gonna go off the rails here. It's my show. I'm gonna go off the rails, right? So I did a little research, right? And there's a LinkedIn post. You can go find it on my LinkedIn profile about the ability of scanning and dealing with vulnerabilities and what the actual tangible impact is. And there's people way smarter than me that have done the research. In fact, there's a whole GitHub repo. I forget the link. I'll try to put it in the comments after. But it was like the statistic was less than 5% of vulnerabilities discovered are actually being exploited or exploitable. So, Frank, you were saying, I ran a scanner, and this happened to us when we first brought in a vulnerability tool to help us. We had a couple hundred devices. We brought in a tool. We ran it. We let it run for a week or 3 to figure out, to make sure it got all the data that it could. And then I looked at it, and I'm like, holy crap, there's 7,000 trillion million lows. We're never going to be able to deal with this. And then, oh my gosh, there's 700 criticals. And I looked at all that data, and I just went, oh my gosh, I'm done. I need a vacation. This research that I came across a couple weeks ago talked about it's probably a mere 5% of all the 10,000 trillion things that it found that we should probably actually address. Yeah. And so, we talk about making sure that we're dealing with vulnerabilities accordingly. And I want to make sure for our MSPs listening, for those that come back in after the fact, don't get scared. It's going to find a bunch of things, especially the first time you run it on a customer. And that's okay. We don't expect you, or I don't expect you, to be 100% perfect on the day you roll it out, because you never will be. Yeah. And this goes back to what we were saying a few minutes ago with the ongoing continuous monitoring and the ongoing continuous stuff of better over time, right? You don't need to get 100% score on the first day of school on the first test of calculus. Maybe by the end of high school, on your senior year, when you're taking the last calculus course and calculus test, you might get a better score than on day one. And that's the whole point about this, is better over time. right?
Well, again,
So sorry, I went off the rails, but I was
that's a perfect example. And I just, again, back to the health, right? You go to your general practitioner, you go to your doctor once a year, hopefully, and they say, oh, you know what, you're 20 pounds over, your heart rate needs to go down, blah blah blah, right? I'm not saying anything, I'm not naming names here, because I look myself in the mirror. But that's your prescription, right? You're going to take care of the most urgent things there. Same with the MSP looking at their vulnerability assessment and their management program ongoing is take care of the criticals and improve the rest as you go. So it's a great point to drive home here. And I think, and actually, as this is sort of our first of 3 in the series here, I think in next week's session, we're going to bring in one of Ismail's colleagues, Wayne Proctor, and he's going to talk about how to look at penetration tests a little bit more deeply and how to put those into strategy, right? How do you deploy the learnings from a pen test? So we'll talk about that, and then our third one's going to be focused on the ongoing monitoring and sort of how to really take advantage of that and how to. And ultimately, I think how to sell that, right? How to position that as part of an MSP's offering and make sure they're including that.
Right. Yeah, I want to add one detail here, Frank. The importance of continuing monitoring. Why is versus an assessment, just like doing assessment. Assessment, we give you like one shot on the time about what you have. It will expire the same day. Like when you do assessment, the next day, maybe there is new major vulnerability like we saw a couple of years ago with Log4j. So if you finish your assessment today, tomorrow morning you have Log4j, then you have to start the assessment again. But with continuing monitoring, so you are always aware what asset at risk and what asset should be fixed first. So you don't have to keep that worrying about, okay, what's going on here? Maybe I have that problem, I don't know. So you have this visibility on continuous time about your, about your asset, about your systems. So you have this peace of mind instead of just shooting one assessment here and maybe after a couple months another one here. So you just taking this like screenshot, but not knowing exactly what's going on your system.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to make sure that we're leaving a little bit time at the end. We'll probably take the next 2 to 3 to 4 minutes to kind of wrap up and be thinking about one key takeaway. So what I've learned today and what MSPs should start to think about is the difference between a penetration test and ongoing vulnerability management, right? A penetration test, a one-time snapshot, human powered, backed up by tools with reporting, and probably not something you're doing every single day of the week. You probably should be considered doing them at least annually. And a lot of your customers in a lot of the regulated spaces like FTC, CMMC, and the list goes on and on and on and on, are actually starting to require something called a penetration test. And that, in my opinion, is not just running a burp suite or an Nmap it is deeper. It involves humans. It involves using a vulnerability management tool, discovering those vulnerabilities, and then actively trying to exploit them in a sandbox environment so you're not taking production down, all that things, right? A penetration test has a defined scope. It has a defined outcome. It has a defined set of authenticated and unauthenticated types of things that these humans probably would use tools to go find those weaknesses, remember our crossfire exercise, and be able to come through our defenses because we didn't have line of sight across those things appropriately, right? Unlike vulnerability management, which is an ongoing, continuing thing that identifies those areas of weaknesses, scores them appropriately, and then gives you a roadmap to move those foxholes closer together and being able to put the blockade up. So we've got the last probably 9 minutes here or so. Frank, I'm going to pull you up here. I'm going to give an opportunity for you to kind of talk about a key takeaway from today, and then Ishmael will pull you up after.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think clearly defining the differences and where they fit, right? And again, it's kind of simple in my mind. I kind of can thinking back to the doctor's appointment, right? You go to your GP to get your physical to understand, right? That's the continuous monitoring. That's the ongoing play. And, the penetration test is going to, the specialist, right? The orthopedic, or maybe it's the heart surgeon or whatever might need to be done to go deeper. And so you don't rely on the same doctor both, right? And in the case for the MSPs, and particularly for a pen test, right? The pen test isn't something that the MSP can or should do on their own, right? That's really an outsider's perspective, somebody that's not biased, that doesn't really, they know a little bit about the network, but they don't know as much as the MSP might. So I would just recommend, when you look at a penetration test, to look for an outside agency such as IGI, right? IGIUS.com if you want to take a look. But they, that outside perspective is really critical on that pen test. And then the MSP, right, can utilize that roadmap and those instances that the penetration test has found to build their SOW and to build their plan of action to improve that scenario. So I think that's sort of wrapped up with a little bit of an extra throw in there on the outside perspective requirement.
Yeah, and you make some really good points. I keep clicking the wrong damn button. So, am I making everybody dizzy? Well, that's fine. So, Ishmael, why don't you take a couple seconds, talk about a key takeaway, practical applicability, and how MSPs can be thinking about penetration testing versus vulnerability management.
I think the military example is the best one that can describe this, because it's really similar to a company. So a country is very similar on interest and how they deal with this vulnerability to a country. So you need to always know about your military, what they have, what weaknesses they have. But sometimes you have to send them on doing these joint exercises, which is the pen testing. So that that your troops are ready to go if there is anything going on, or if there is a war or something. I think that's, in my opinion, that's the closest example to keep in mind. Also, keep in mind that vulnerability, they will be always here. So you will not have a day where you say, okay, I'm done, I fixed everything, and I can go to rest. So this is why monitoring is the key to stay safe. And of course, work with a reputation company will give you more insurance that you are doing like a good job keeping your environment safe. So yeah, that's what I can say about this.
Awesome. And as I start to think about a key takeaway specifically for MFPs, I guess I should probably pull myself up and give myself the opportunity to also do the same thing, right?
To look pretty.
So penetration testing versus vulnerability management. First, in our opinion, penetration testing involves humans. It involves tools, but it involves humans. It involves authenticated and unauthenticated. It involves a defined scope, and the ability for you as an MSP to work with a reputable company that actually can do actual penetration tests, right? So first and foremost, penetration tests, have a company, have a people, have a process. It is not just a tool. Vulnerability, on the other hand, absolutely, there are great tools that can help identify those areas of weakness, those areas of risk that can be used during the penetration test. Having a program in place to identify those devices, those things that are vulnerable, and then score them appropriately. Don't just install a tool, but actually build a vulnerability management program that has SLAs, or service level objectives, right? Meaning Something critical is dealt with in X number of hours. Something low is dealt with in X number of days, weeks, months, years, whatever. But build a program within your MSP so that you're ongoing, continuous addressing. Lastly, the when. Most of the risk frameworks that are out there, most of the standards that are out there have some kind of penetration requirement. And you should probably do those at least annually. But as Ishmael said earlier, you do it today and tomorrow log4j comes out. Yeah, okay. So be thinking about that, right? Be thinking about building that into your practice as an MSP to at least do something with an organization at least annually, and be continuing doing vulnerability management 24/7, 365, and dealing with them appropriately. And anybody else have anything they want to add? We've got like 3 or 4 minutes left here. I'll give you all an opportunity to kind of fill in where, any other related thoughts, features.
I was just going to add, and I don't know if you have a slide coming up with the contact information, but if anybody would like to reach out to us, nodeware.com to learn about Nodeware and the vulnerability management there.
See this
on the bottom of the screen. There you go. Take a look there. You can also send me an email at fraimondi, FRAIMONDI at igius.com. And if you want to talk with Ishmael or I, just reach out to me. I'm happy to connect us. If you want to learn a little bit more and have a deeper discussion, love to do that. We, a lot of interestingly, right there, kind of to the human factor of penetration tests. No two tests are alike, right? And no two instances are like. We get, almost every proposal we do in SOW is customized, right? I would say 99.9% of them are customized. Because you might have 10 environments, 10 internals, and 5 externals, or whatever the numbers, right? It's always a combination of how much they want, when do they need it, whether it's a baseline or comprehensive. We didn't even get into that. We could talk about that more next week, Tim.
Yeah,
the differences between a baseline and a comprehensive pen test, because there is a difference there. Back to the human touch. So please reach out. We'd love to go deeper on this and just spit shoot a scenario of what you're looking for and what the mapping could be.
Yeah, you bring something up that I always forget, and that is, what is our call to action? Why are we doing this? Obviously, we want to do this because we want to educate and help grow the MSPs. We want to be able to talk about kind of these things, penetration, vulnerability. We want to have great experts like Ishmael on here to kind of help guide us through this conversation. But yeah, we want you in a live demo. or as Frank said, yeah, we want you to pop on over and ask. And I need to get better at doing that. I've been kind of nudged by everybody, like for every 10 things, you need to do the ask. Okay, so I'm doing
nothing else. You got to have one slide with our contact info. That's our tip for next week.
That's our tip for next week. I'm going to share this real quick. I'm going to come over here and share. I believe it's this one. Yeah, so don't mind all the LinkedIn garbage behind there because, that's LinkedIn. But we have one more series, or the next in our series, coming up. Same bat time, same bat channel. Find us here on LinkedIn, 1 o'clock every Thursday going forward, where we'll have Wayne and myself and Frank talking about some of these truths, some of these myths, right? Some of these things. And so make sure you do it.
With a focus on the strategy, right? How do you build your strategy around what you found, what's been unveiled? So we want to enable the MSPs to really sort of take some tools and go forward with them.
So make sure you absolutely tune in next week, 1 o'clock Eastern. Do the follow, share, find us on LinkedIn, blah, 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 do the things. So we dive into next week's series of penetration tests to truth unveiled. I'm Tim Golden, founder of Compliance Scorecard. We will see you all next week.
Thank you, Tim.
Subscribe now.